There's a canal on the southern edge of Miami-Dade County, running past fruit groves and quiet suburban streets in a town called Homestead. In March of 2014, someone pulled a small crocodile out of that canal. Just a young one, under 3 feet long, the kind of thing you might mistake for a big lizard sunning itself on the bank. They let it go. A year later, they caught it again. This time, it was in Everglades National Park. And in that single year, that little animal had done something that should have made every wildlife official in Florida sit up straight in their chair. It had nearly doubled in length. It had put on weight. It was healthy, well-fed, and thriving in the American wild, in a place where it absolutely, positively should not have been able to survive at all. Because when the scientists finally ran its blood, they discovered this wasn't a Florida crocodile. It wasn't anything native to this continent. It had come from the other side of the world, from a species that eats zebras, that drags full-grown wildebeest under the water, that, in its home range, kills people. I'm Wade Halloran. I've spent the better part of my life out in the field with animals most folks only ever see on a screen, and in all that time, I've learned one thing worth passing on. The story everybody agrees on is very often not the true one. For a decade now, when people picture Florida's monster invader, the thing crawling up out of the swamp to give the Sunshine State nightmares, they picture one animal, a giant snake, the Burmese python. I'm here to tell you the python was never the one to be afraid of, and the animal that is, the one with an actual documented record of hunting human beings, has already been caught 3 separate times, living wild within a short drive of downtown Miami. Nobody knows how it got here, and nobody can tell you how many more are still out there. Stay with me because I want to walk you through exactly how the wrong monster ended up famous, and how the real one slipped in through the back door while everyone was looking the other way. The monster we agreed to fear. Let's start with the python, because you need to understand why it captured the imagination the way it did. The Burmese python is a genuine ecological catastrophe. I won't sugarcoat that. These snakes got loose in South Florida decades ago through the exotic pet trade, animals that got too big for the aquarium, dumped in a canal by owners who didn't want them anymore, or escaped during storms. And they took to the Everglades like they'd been designed for it. The largest ones hauled out of that swamp have stretched past 18 feet and weighed more than 150 pounds. They eat. That's what they do, and they do it relentlessly. In the parts of the Everglades where pythons have been established longest, scientists have documented staggering collapses in the mammal population. Raccoons, possums, bobcats, marsh rabbits, all of them vanishing. There are stretches of that park where the small mammals are simply gone. The python did that. It's real, and it's a tragedy, and the people fighting it are doing hard, important work. So the snake earned its reputation as a destroyer. That part is true. But somewhere along the way, in the retelling, that reputation grew a second head. The python stopped being a threat to the ecosystem and started being cast as a threat to you. The giant snake in the water that might wrap around a swimmer, that might take a child, the stuff of every campfire story and every breathless headline. And that part? That's where the popular story and the buried truth start to come apart. What the numbers actually say. Here's something the U.S. Geological Survey did that never got the attention it deserved. Federal scientists went looking, deliberately, methodically, for every case over a full decade in which a wild Burmese python in Everglades National Park struck at a human being without being provoked. 10 years of records, a park that draws more than 1 million visitors every single year. You want to guess how many incidents they found? 5. 5 in 10 years. And here's the part that really tells the story. Every one of those 5 strikes was directed at a field biologist, someone wading through remote flooded wetlands doing research, not a single one at an ordinary park visitor. 2 of them caused minor puncture wounds. The rest caused no injury at all. And the researchers concluded most of these weren't even attacks in the real sense. They were cases of mistaken identity, a snake lunging at what it thought was a meal and aborting the second it realized a human is not on the menu. Not one death, not one visitor harmed. Over a decade, with 1 million people a year walking those trails. The scientists' verdict was about as plain as government scientists ever get. The risk of a person being killed by a python in that park, they wrote, is extremely low. These are ambush predators built to eat mammals the size of a rabbit or a possum. A grown adult human is not prey to them, and they know it. Now, I want to be fair because I always want to be fair with you. Low risk is not zero risk. A very large python striking a very small person could, in theory, do real harm. The scientists said so plainly. But, in theory, under rare circumstances, is a very different animal from man-eater. The python is a wrecking ball for the wildlife of the Everglades. It is not and never has been a hunter of people. So hold that thought. Keep it right there in your hand. Because the whole time the python was starring in the horror movie, an actual man-eater was quietly moving into the neighborhood, and it fit the description the python never earned. 3 crocodiles that didn't belong. Go back to that little crocodile from the Homestead Canal. It wasn't the first. Between the years 2009 and 2014, 3 crocodiles were captured in the wild in extreme South Florida. One caught on a neighbor's porch in Miami, one at a fruit and spice park in Homestead, one in that canal I told you about. To the untrained eye, they might have looked like the crocodiles that belong here. Florida does have a native crocodile, and I'll come back to it. But something about these animals was off. So a team of researchers at the University of Florida did the one thing that settles an argument for good. They ran the DNA. The results were published in April of 2016 in the Journal of Herpetological Conservation and Biology, and the finding was unambiguous. These were not American crocodiles. These were Crocodilus niloticus, Nile crocodiles, a species native to sub-Saharan Africa, thousands of miles from any water in the Western Hemisphere. Let me tell you what a Nile crocodile is, so the weight of this lands the way it should. The Nile crocodile is the second largest reptile alive on Earth today. A big male grows past 16 feet and can weigh upward of 1,600 pounds, as much as a small car. In its native range, it is a generalist, which is a scientist's polite way of saying it eats whatever it can catch. Fish, birds, antelope, zebra. It will take down animals as large as a young hippo, and it eats people. Not by rare accident. Routinely enough that it holds a body count almost no other wild animal can match. The researchers laid the figures out cold. Between 2010 and 2014, Nile crocodiles were responsible for at least 480 attacks on human beings in Africa and 123 deaths. And scientists estimate that worldwide, this one species kills as many as 200 people every year. I want you to sit with that number next to the python's number, because that contrast is the whole story. The python, not one human death in a decade in the Everglades. The Nile crocodile, up to 200 human deaths a year. To put an even sharper point on it, the same researchers noted that in a typical year, sharks, the animal we've all been trained to fear, kill about 6 people in the entire world. 6. The Nile croc is in a different category of danger altogether. And 3 of them had been pulled alive from the wilds of South Florida. The part that should worry you. Now, you could tell yourself a comforting story here. You could say, all right, 3 unlucky crocodiles ended up somewhere they didn't belong, in a climate they weren't built for, and surely they just withered and died. Cold snap comes through, the tropical animal can't handle it, problem solves itself. The scientists checked that assumption too, and this is where the comfortable story falls apart. Remember the little one from the Homestead Canal, caught, released, and caught again a year later? That accidental year in the wild became an unplanned experiment. The researchers had a before measurement and an after measurement on the same animal living free in Florida. And what they found was that this juvenile had grown nearly 28% faster than wild Nile crocodile juveniles do in parts of their own native African range. Read that again slowly. It didn't just survive Florida, it grew faster in Florida than it would have back home in Africa. When they examined its stomach, they found it had been eating largemouth bass, a Florida fish, a native meal taken cleanly from a Florida canal. The lead researcher, Kenneth Crisco of the Florida Museum of Natural History, put it about as directly as a scientist can. They know these animals can survive in the Florida wilderness for years. They know the animals grow quickly here. They know how the species behaves in its native range. And, he said, there's no reason to think that behavior would change one bit here in Florida. The species can live here, it can grow here, and the thing it does everywhere else it lives, it has no reason to stop doing that here either. They didn't swim from Africa. So how did they get in? This is the question that keeps the whole thing from being a solved case. Because the honest answer from the people who did the work is that they don't know. And I find that far more unsettling than any tidy villain would be. The DNA didn't just tell the scientists what species these animals were. It told them the three crocodiles were closely related to one another, likely introduced from a single source, and that their genetic line traced back to native Nile crocodile populations in South Africa. Then the researchers did something clever. Florida has licensed attractions that legally keep Nile crocodiles, places like Disney's Animal Kingdom, which imports them for display. So the team took DNA samples from those captive, permitted animals and compared them to the three found in the wild. They didn't match. Crisco said it in a line that stuck with me the moment I read it. They didn't swim from Africa, he said, but we really don't know how they got into the wild. Think about what that comparison rules out. These weren't escapees from the theme parks and the licensed exhibits because the genetics don't line up. That leaves a darker set of doors. The most likely one, the researchers believe, is Florida's booming exotic pet trade. Animals brought into the state through channels without proper permits by a collector who either failed to contain them and let them slip loose, or, worse, released them into the Everglades on purpose, hoping they might breed. Someone, in other words, appears to have brought one of the most dangerous predators on the planet into South Florida off the books. And we still can't say for certain who or why or how many. The quieter victim you haven't heard about. Here's a piece almost nobody talks about, and it deserves a moment, because the danger isn't only to people. Florida already has a crocodile, its own, the American crocodile, and I don't want you to confuse the two because they could not be more different in temperament. The American crocodile is one of the great quiet success stories in American conservation. Hunted and squeezed by habitat loss, it was listed as endangered back in 1975, down to a few hundred animals clinging on in the mangroves at the southern tip of the state. Through decades of patient protection, it clawed its way back. There are roughly 1,000 of them, some estimates now higher, living in the coastal mangroves and estuaries of South Florida. And here's the thing you need to know about that animal. It is shy, reclusive. One of the crocodile expert Frank Mazzotti's colleagues called them the sweethearts of the crocodilian world, the least defensive, the least aggressive. In all the years American crocodiles and people have shared that coastline, wildlife officials can point to only a single documented bite, and it wasn't fatal. This native crocodile has never been responsible for a confirmed human death in the United States, ever. Same goes, more or less, for the alligator you picture when you picture Florida, a native animal that generally wants nothing to do with you unless someone's been foolish enough to feed it. Now drop a Nile crocodile into that picture. The danger isn't only that it might hunt a person, it's that a Nile croc could breed with our endangered native crocodile. Any hybrid offspring would degrade the genetic integrity of a species we spent 50 years bringing back from the edge, polluting that hard-won recovery with the bloodline of an aggressive foreigner. And along the way, the Nile croc is known to take livestock, which is grim news for the cattle operations that sit right up against the Everglades. So the threat runs in three directions at once: toward people, toward our native wildlife, and toward the farms at the swamp's edge. Now, the honest part. If I stopped here, I'd be doing exactly what I told you at the start I wouldn't do. I'd be handing you a monster and letting you run with it. So let me be straight, because the truth of this is more interesting than the scare. There is no confirmed horde of Nile crocodiles roaming the Everglades. That is not what the evidence shows, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. The researchers themselves believe it's likely more are out there. Crisco's own words were that the odds of the handful of people who study Florida reptiles having found every last Nile croc are probably not good. Mazzotti said he'd heard enough sightings of a strange-looking croc to think it's possible they haven't pulled the last one out. But possible and likely are not proven, and there is genuine disagreement here. A spokeswoman for Everglades National Park, where one of these animals was captured, flatly disagreed that any Nile crocs still roam the park. The skeptics make a fair point too. The small number of juveniles that were introduced don't appear to have survived to breeding maturity, and no one has ever confirmed a breeding population. No nest, no verified hatchlings in the wild. There may be none left at all. So the real question this story answers is not the one the scary headline wants to ask. It is not, is there a swarm of man-eaters in the swamp? The truthful, verified answer is narrower, and to my mind, more haunting than that. It is this: a confirmed man-eater, an animal that kills up to 200 people a year on another continent, was proven by DNA to have reached the Florida wild not once, but 3 times. It was proven to survive here. It was proven to grow here, faster than it grows at home. And no one can tell you how it got in, or whether the door it came through is still open. That's the buried truth under the python's shadow. We spent a decade afraid of the wrong animal, a giant snake that has never killed a soul in that park, while the animal that actually fits the nightmare walked in quietly and got measured twice before anyone realized what they were holding. Before you go, if a story like this is the kind of thing you didn't know you wanted to know until you knew it, the real animal behind the famous one, the truth underneath the headline, then let me just say this plainly. There are a great many more of these where this came from, and I've got no shortage of them to tell. If you'd like to keep them coming, following along is the whole way I know you're out there. And I'm curious about something. I want you to think back over your own life and tell me, down in the comments, when has the exciting, obvious answer turned out to be flat wrong? The moment you found out the boring, unglamorous truth had been sitting there the whole time, while the flashier story got all the attention. I read those, and the best ones stick with me. As for the crocodile, I'll leave you where the scientists themselves have to leave it. Somewhere in the canals and the mangroves and the sawgrass of South Florida, the door may still be open. We simply don't know how wide. Whatever's already queued up on your screen there, YouTube seems to think it's the next one for you, and more often than not, it's on to something. Go ahead and give it a look. I'll see you in the next one.